The G Connection, Harness Gravity and Reverse Aging, written by Dr. Joan Vernikos with Robin S. Hosie, foreword by astronaut and Senator John Glenn, and narrated by Glenda Adams. Introduction. My many years of research with NASA involved understanding the effects of space travel on astronauts. The ultimate goal was to find ways to protect them from any adverse effects. It soon became clear to me that astronauts, almost without exception, young, fit, highly trained, and hand-chosen, return from space feeling old beyond their years. Neither I nor any of my colleagues had any doubt that there was a link between space travel and aging. But what exactly was the nature of that link? After turning the problem over in my mind for months, the answer dawned on me one day in July 1980. It was an answer in the form of a question. Could the link be gravity, or rather the lack of its use here on Earth? In space, there is essentially no gravity. As we on Earth grow older, we tend to give in to gravity. We sit down a lot more than we used to. We do not stand up as often or as energetically as before. We move about and exercise a lot less. We have invented clever ways of doing less physical work, with the invention of motor cars, self-propelling grass mowers, and household devices that require minimal effort. We even upend more time in bed reading than we were younger. All these habits reduce the extent to which we use gravity, which has its maximum influence on our bodies when we are upright. As a result, we allow gravity to drag us down. In order to test my theory, I used methods on the ground that simulated the removal of gravity. The best of these reduced the gravity load by asking healthy volunteers to stay in bed from 4 to 84 days so we could study their physiological and psychological responses. It was this research, originally designed to help us develop countermeasures for astronauts, that convinced me that gravity, the force under which all life on Earth has evolved, is our body's friend and not its foe. More importantly, it seemed to me that the countermeasure treatments we were testing in astronauts and our bed rest volunteers could also be applied in order to delay, prevent, or even reverse many of the symptoms we commonly associate with old age. We cannot escape growing older in years, but we can, with a positive approach to life, the right diet, activities, and exercises that capitalize on the gravity around us, stay young, healthy, and independent as long as we live. Various non-technical audiences became increasingly interested in hearing more about this subject. At the end of my talks, many asked me, "Where can I find out more about this?" I knew of no reference work I could recommend. This book is in response to that and other questions. It aims to put in plain language a multitude of research discoveries from space that may help us understand how we must constantly use gravity to improve the quality of our lives. By making your use of gravity a daily habit, like brushing your teeth, you will remain healthy and active on Earth for as you live. Look around and notice how the number of older Americans is growing. By 2050, the number of those over 85 is projected to increase by 600%. This will have all manner of social, economic, and medical consequences. My experience both in space and on the Senate's Special Committee on Aging convinced me we should capitalize on what we learn from astronauts in space to help our ever-increasing elderly population on Earth enjoy productive, healthy lives. This timely and comprehensive book by Joan Vernikos explains lessons learned from space in readable, understandable, and intuitively appealing terms. It gives practical recommendations on how we can best take charge of our health and maintain our independence. I first met Joan Vernikos on June 18, 1996, when visiting NASA Administrator Dan Golden. Also with me was John Isold, the attending physician to Congress. We were discussing the relationship between space travel and the aging process, following on a well-received speech Golden had delivered to the American Association for Retired Persons, AARP. I had already read widely on the subject and talked with NASA doctors, but I was curious to meet the author of Parallel Processes. The study of human adaptation to space helps us understand aging, which had grabbed my attention. It was apparent that Joan Vernikos, director of life sciences at NASA, and I thought alike regarding the similarities between the physiological changes brought about by space travel and those associated with the aging process. More particularly, how could we best take advantage of the countermeasures we had learned to use for astronauts and apply them to treat the normal health problems among the elderly on Earth? On September 3rd, I had the opportunity to debate the matter in the Senate. I already had the full backing of the National Institute on Aging. Joan Vernikos had developed an excellent working relationship with the National Institutes of Health and was now of considerable help in persuading them of the scientific merit of having a 77-year-old fly in space again. Yes, I had wanted to go back into space, but the main reason was to do research and acquire new information. The door to that research has now undoubtedly been opened. The STS-95 Discovery flight resulted in a barrage of publicity, which focused people's minds positively on the aging process. Hardly a day goes by without an article in the papers or the expounding of new theories. Joan Vernikos pioneered the research method of putting healthy men and women in continuous head-down bed rest in order to study, on the ground, how the human adapts to spaceflight. She brings to this book her particular expertise in such subjects as hormones and the stress response. Her intricate knowledge of these fields and her lifetime involvement with NASA make her ideally qualified to write this book. Fix the lay reader with an inquiring mind. Best of all, the sections on what you can do about it make this a very practical book, utilizing the very best of both Earth and space-based medicine for your benefit. John Glenn, former senator, DOH, and astronaut. Chapter 1. Do astronauts grow older in space? The advantage of living is not measured by length, but by use. Some men have lived long and have lived little. Attend to it while you are in it. It lies in your will, not in the number of years. Michel de Montaigne, 1553-1592. Essays. We all grow up with preconceptions and make assumptions about the way things are. Then someone finds a new way of looking at the world, and our myths are shattered. The earth is not flat. Girls are just as good at math as boys. It is now possible for humans to leave Earth in their flying machines. A person with a broken spine will walk again someday soon, maybe not quite like you and me, but unaided nonetheless. Another assumption that just about everybody shares is that advancing years bring about irreversible changes in body and mind, changes that signal an end to independence and the joy of living. However, it does not have to be so, and the evidence comes from a most unlikely source: space. The ultimate challenge. They were stirring times, those early years when humans set out to conquer space. The Russians astounded the world when, in October 1957, they launched Sputnik-1, the first man-made satellite to girdle Earth. This triumph was followed by another, even more spectacular. On April 12, 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin in Vostok-1 became the first human to be blasted into space. During a flight that lasted just over 108 minutes, he orbited Earth. There were parades, medals, cheering crowds, and broad smiles all around Moscow. In Washington, there was consternation, for this was the era of the Cold War, and a rocket powerful enough to launch a man into space could easily be modified to carry a more sinister payload, a nuclear warhead. America had to catch up, and fast. The space race was on. In May 1961, President John F. Kennedy told the country, "I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth." The National Aeronautics and Space Administration, which had come into being in 1958, delivered a swift and dramatic response. On February 22, 1962, John Glenn stepped aboard a Mercury capsule, which he named Friendship 7, to become the first U.S. astronaut to orbit the Earth. I was at Ohio State University at the time, teaching pharmacology to medical students. Caught up in the sheer excitement of space, I knew instinctively where I wanted to be. By 1964, I had joined NASA. As daring as President Kennedy's vision was, it was achieved with 5 months to spare. On July 23, 1969, former test pilot Neil Armstrong, commander of the Apollo 11 mission, became the first man to set foot on the moon. America had done far more than merely catch up. Many new technologies were developed as a result of the space race. Barcodes, quartz watches, ball pens that can write upside down, underwater, and even on glass, communication satellites, computers, imaging techniques, cordless tools, a scratch and glare reducing coating for sunglasses, a non-stick surface now used for frying pan. We went there because it was the ultimate challenge. And though these byproducts have proven useful, they are eclipsed by another spin-off from the space race, one that is of vital importance to every man, woman, and child living on Earth. Research whose main purpose was to help American astronauts conquer space has led to a fuller understanding of how our bodies work. It led to a discovery that will certainly help people, Earth, stay healthy and energetic throughout life, reversing and delaying many of the problems we usually associate with aging. Gravity, the common link. Gravity is the force that keeps us rooted to Earth. It keeps the stars in their courses and the planets in their orbits. The gravitational pull of the moon, nearly 240,000 miles away, 384,000 from Earth, causes the regular swellings and retreats of the tides. Into space, at 25,000 miles per hour, gravity is measured in units known as Gs, and the force that normally operates on Earth is designated as 1G. For a rocket to break free from Earth's gravitational field, it has to reach a speed of more than 25,000 miles per hour, 40,000 kilometers per hour. Achieving this, from a standing start, calls for a tremendous burst of acceleration, which increases the compression forces on astronauts to 5G or even 6G. Even though astronauts lie on their backs during launch to reduce the full impact of this hypergravity, it puts an immense strain on their bodies. This is one reason why they need to be in peak physical condition. On Earth, the load of gravity on an individual can be increased by rapidly spinning the person on a wheel-like apparatus, called a centrifuge. In 1795, Erasmus Darwin, a physician and the grandfather of Charles Darwin, proposed using centrifugation to reduce fever, slow down the heart rate, and induce sleep. In the 19th century, centrifuges were used in Europe to treat the mentally ill. These earlier attempts did not survive the test of time. However, I believe hypergravity by centrifugation has other potential medical applications, which should become more apparent in the course of this book. Centrifuges, designed to carry humans, can create a force as high as 20 G, though no human can tolerate that level of force. Russian studies found most humans exposed to hypergravity in a rotating room could tolerate no more than 6 G for several days, but they could live for longer periods at 2.0 G. Fighter pilots may experience short bursts of 6 to 10 G pulling in the head-to-toe direction, but only for a few seconds. At present, hypergravity is exploited mainly by amusement parks, in roller coasters, and other fun rides. It pins thrill seekers to their seats even when they are traveling upside down, with the floor above their feet. Near the other extreme, the pull of gravity on the moon, which has a diameter only a quarter the size of Earth's, is as low as 0.165 G. This is 1/6 of Earth's G. You could easily jump 10 times higher on He-Moon than you can down here. In 1666, so the story goes, Isaac Newton watched an apple falling from a tree, as millions had done before him. The difference was that Newton wondered about the caused the apple to fall. This led him to develop the laws of gravity and motion, which helped us understand the movements of the planets and made it possible for humans to explore the vastness of the cosmos. My personal quest. My fascination with space was selfish. As a scientist, I knew the only way to find out how we are affected by something in the world we live in was to trot something away, then observe how the body reacts. When scientists wanted to know how light affected humans, they studied what happened to them if they lived in darkness. To understand what role Earth's gravity had upon us, we had to go into space. At last, it was possible to do that. But the primary objective of my research was to provide the knowledge and tools, make sure astronauts could live and work in space. Well, you may say, what is so special about gravity? Everyone surely knows we live in gravity. We are surrounded by it. Aren't we taught in school about Earth's rotation around the sun and Newton's falling apple? Most of us are aware that what we weights, perhaps realize they owe their benefits to it as well, and yet many of us are unaware of how gravity affects the way we look, feel, and function. The space race made it possible for the first time to explore the subject. The answers led to an astonishing insight for those of us living down here on Earth, one that established the fascinating link between gravity and aging well. What spaceflight does to the body. Nothing could be more unnatural for those of us who live on this beautiful blue planet, than to step beyond gravity's reach. Every organ and function of the human body, indeed of every living creature, has evolved, developed, and taken shape under the burden imposed by gravity. The way we use this force determines how strong we will be in our prime, how well we function throughout life, and how far our skin will sag and muscles waste as we grow older. It is small wonder that traveling in space, where the pull of gravity is practically reduced to zero, can have a damaging effect on an astronaut's body. However, many of the consequences predicted by the National Academy of Sciences experts did not happen. Astronauts can swallow in space, and their eyes do not fall out. As long ago as 1961 and 1962, Soviet cosmonauts Titov and Nikolaev, who were the first to stay in space longer than 24 hours, had trouble maintaining their blood pressure when standing upon their return to Earth. Later, as flights grew much longer, this problem was so serious that cosmonauts had to be carried away from the landing site in reclining chairs. Disturbed regulation of blood pressure turned out to be only one of a number of symptoms. Astronauts who took part in the Gemini and Apollo missions of the 1960s showed signs of reduced aerobic capacity and were losing calcium from their bones. A kind of anemia, caused by a reduction in the number of red blood cells, was diagnosed in astronauts returning from Skylab missions in the early 1970s. We now know that all the muscles, but especially those that support posture, will atrophy during spaceflight. Similar changes happen to the bones of the legs and lower spine, which lose strength and can become brittle. The digestive system is affected in a number of ways. The motility of our gut is reduced so that it becomes sluggish. The body is less able to absorb calcium from the intestines. The immune system is depressed. Astronauts become more sensitive to heat and cold, and they often have difficulty getting a good night's sleep. When astronauts return to Earth, their eyesight is not as sharp as it was. Find it hard to keep their balance, typically standing with their feet wide apart and walking with their legs further apart than usual. After long flights, they tend to shuffle and find it difficult to get around corners without running into walls. As in space, so on Earth. If you were asked what condition you would associate with the array of symptoms just listed, space travel would not be the first thing that came to mind. It is more likely that you would think of some of the old people you know. For the very same bodily changes experienced in an accelerated form by the astronauts are what we have come to expect down here on Earth, from a process that is spread out over a lifetime, commonly known as aging. In 1984, I wrote a pamphlet pointing out these similarities. I was not alone in my conclusions. In the mid-1980s, John Glenn, now a U.S. Senator, D. Ohio, was chairman of the Senate Committee on Aging. As the committee heard testimony describing the various ills afflicting the elderly, it struck him that he had come across some of these ills in a different setting. Glenn was convinced that the high number of symptoms common to both spaceflight and aging was more than just coincidence. 10 years later, when I was NASA's Director of Life Sciences in Washington, D.C., I well remember going by our Public Affairs Office's TV set one day and glancing at a discussion on the Senate floor. Glenn was urging his colleagues to support space station, while waving over his head a pamphlet on the parallels between aging and the effects of spaceflight. My pamphlet! I could hardly believe my eyes. Glenn later used his influence to encourage the National Institute on Aging and NASA to work together on this subject. The rest is history. John Glenn's return to space at the age of 77, his 9-day flight on STS-95 in October 1998, did more, by its very boldness, to increase public awareness of what space research could contribute to the cause of healthy aging than any scientist or scientific report could ever have done. Do you age faster in space? I am often asked if I believe that astronauts grow old faster in space. The answer to this is a resounding no. The changes that happen to astronauts in space are appropriate for in space. They are only abnormal compared to their condition before going to space. It is when the spacecraft begins to re-enter Earth's atmosphere and comes in for landing that these changes become serious problems. All astronauts, whatever their age, show signs of physical deterioration as they experience gravity again. But with a little time, these changes can be reversed. Astronauts recover fairly quickly after their flights. Follow-up observations and annual physicals have shown that the recovery is permanent. This mysteriously telescoped space aging is a problem that lasts only as long as they are learning to cope with gravity once more, after living, even for a comparatively short time, in this highly unnatural environment, a world without gravity. That is clear enough. But what then is the exact connection between spaceflight, gravity, and aging? The answer came from the research we were doing on the ground to find ways of supporting the health of our astronauts in space. Lying in bed for the sake of astronauts. Human beings are more affected by gravity than most other animals because of our erect posture. The maximum effects of gravity occur when we are upright and its force is pulling in the head-to-toe direction. All you have to do to reduce its impact is to sit down, or, more effectively, lie down. When you do so, gravity is only pulling across the width or depth of your body, not along its length. This simple fact is of enormous importance in explaining the relationship between spaceflight and aging. The space race provided both the motivation and the resources to discover ways of safeguarding the health of our astronauts. All we needed was a research method, a way of coming as close as possible on Earth to reproducing the zero gravity effects of flight in space, and of course, sufficient volunteers willing to subject themselves to our research. The number of human beings who can be sent into space is limited, and they have more than enough to do without being subjected to constant tests and experiments. To date, the number of both astronauts and cosmonauts who have flown is only around 400. We needed to study far larger numbers if we were build up a databank big enough to point to solid conclusions regarding the links between gravity and health, and to develop ways of preventing the unpleasant bodily changes suffered by astronauts in space. Epidemic that led to an inspiration. First, the method. We tried several, including one that seemed, for a time, to show some promise. Immersing a volunteer's entire body in warm water, with only the head above the surface. This certainly reduces the pull of gravity on the mass of the body, but it has major drawbacks. After 12 hours of soaking, the body becomes macerated. Breathing becomes difficult, and the sensory deprivations involved can cause psychological problems. The immersion method was thus abandoned as impractical. Instead, we turned to a more manageable way of mimicking the effects of going into space, putting people to bed and asking them to stay there for days, weeks, even months. This method came from an inspired medical observation. Until the Salk vaccine became available in the 1950s, every summer seemed to bring an epidemic of the viral infection poliomyelitis somewhere in the world. Franklin D. Roosevelt, in his early 30s, was the best-known victim of this viral infection, which results in clipping paralysis of the muscles and serious bone loss. In the early 1940s, Don Whedon, at the National Institutes of Health in Maryland, questioned whether the bone loss might be due not to the disease itself, but to the fact that its victims were rendered immobile. He proved the point by recruiting medical students to stay in bed for a month, wearing casts that immobilized their lower bodies. Whedon predicted that astronauts would also lose bone calcium, because in the near total absence of gravity in space, they would not need to use their lower limbs. He was right. He also went on to propose bed rest as the model of choice for studying on the ground the effects of prolonged spaceflight. The search for volunteers. We need volunteers who were in good health and between 25 and 55 years old to match the age of most astronauts. We were honest about the drawbacks. If they joined the experiment, they would not be able to have visitors or leave their beds to take a shower or go to the bathroom. And their bodies would undergo changes, which we believed would be reversed once they got up and walked about again. Those who accepted these terms came from many walks of life. Among the volunteers in my studies were some colorful characters: a CIA helicopter pilot, a trombonist, an air traffic controller, a stand-up comedian, a millionaire, a lawyer, a nurse, an eccentric, who had been educated at a private school and was rebelling against society, and a giant of a charmer who kept everyone in order. Over the years, more than 2,500 men and women have been studied in US, Japanese, European, and Russian bed rest programs. We had surprisingly few dropouts, and only in our earliest studies. The handful that they felt they had made the wrong choice came to this decision within 3 days. We could not, of course, match the excitement of the real thing, but most of our volunteers felt like building astronauts. They were powerfully motivated by the knowledge that they were making a real contribution to America's space effort. Bed rest, of course, is no holiday. When I asked volunteers, "What was the hardest part for you?" I expected answers like the diet or having to use a bedpan, but the consistent answer was simply lying in bed. The bald facts about bed rest. The success of the US space program in landing men on the moon led to a reluctant interest by the Soviets in the potential benefits of collaboration. It was a truly historic moment when, in 1975, a US Apollo capsule docked with a Soyuz spacecraft and, for the first time, astronauts and cosmonauts shook hands in space. Soviet and American space scientists got together to share some of their findings and insights. A year later, I visited Moscow with a NASA delegation. One of our Soviet colleagues, Yuri Sinkovich, told us he had spent 30 days in head-down bed rest as their first test subject. Sinkovich was an avid collector of new experiences. He was a doctor, a TV personality, a public relations expert, and, in any time he had left over, an explorer. In 1970, he set out from Africa to cross the Atlantic with the Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl aboard the papyrus raft Ra-2. Their aim was to demonstrate that ancient people from Africa may have crossed the Atlantic before Columbus. By reaching Barbados in the West Indies, they proved their point, in theory at least. I was interested in getting first-hand impressions about head-down bed rest from this multifaceted man. He thought for a bit, then pointed to his bald head, implying that it got that way because of constant rubbing against the headboard. It took me quite a few moments to appreciate his Russian sense of humor. The Soviets had been in space the longest, and they, too, had decided that the best research method was the one using bed rest. Towards the early 1970s, they improved on this method by tilting the bed so that the head was lower than the feet. This was because returning cosmonauts had complained that lying in a horizontal bed after spaceflight made them feel as though they were slipping off the foot of the bed. The angle of tilt they felt most comfortable was 6 degrees. In 1980, I introduced this Soviet model of head-down bed rest into the U.S. D. O'Hara, already a legend in the U.S. space, became the manager of NASA's California-based Human Research Facility. As a very young Air Force nurse, she was recruited to be the nurse for the original 7 astronauts: Alan Shepard, Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Wally Schirra, and Deke Slayton. She showed amazing skill in handling people of all kinds, from the danger-loving right stuff types to the most unassuming of bed rest volunteers. They respected her and they trusted her, and she stood up for them all. Carrying out these studies for many days was not easy and severely challenged Dee's organizational skills, but she passed with flying colors. The case for the dwarf payphone. When we wanted a payphone installed in the facility bedside height, the telephone company told us it was impossible. Payphones could only be fixed at the regulation height, the height suitable for a person who was standing. But that's not what I want, said Dee O'Hara. I want it lower. Sorry, said the engineer. I have to follow regulations, so that's what you're going to get. Dee told him this was of no use, and indicated with her hand the height at which she wanted the phone. These guys, they must be dwarfs, said the engineer. Oh, but didn't I tell you that's just what they are, said Dee. The phone was fixed where she wanted it. What did we learn from this research? The bed rest model proved to be an excellent way of inducing the changes in the body we had seen in astronauts. Granted, they happened more slowly and were less severe than in space, but it was through studying healthy human volunteers lying in bed that we learned how these bodily changes were produced and how they could be prevented. Just about everybody knows the feeling of dizziness and weakness when getting out of the bed after a bout of flu. At On Time, this was thought to be an after effect of the illness. Then similar feelings of wooziness were reported by astronauts, formed the earliest Mercury and Gemini missions. At first, this was believed to be the result of being crammed in the tiny space capsule and seasickness, brought on by bobbing up and down in the ocean after re-entry while waiting to be picked up by helicopter. But we saw similar symptoms, an increased tendency to faint when they finally got out of bed in our volunteers, when they stood up even after as little as 24 hours in bed. Just as in space, blood pressure and the circulation are not alone in being affected by a stay in bed, where the effect of gravity is reduced. Muscles, bonies, the sense of balance, the digestive system, and the immune system all suffer. One of the most important questions we asked the studies was how to find ways of preventing these changes in astronauts, especially on long missions. Is it just inactivity that causes the problem? Could exercise in space or while lying in bed be the answer? We tested various exercise regimes, including workouts on a kind of horizontal bicycle, and found that they brought about some improvement, but non-completely prevented the harmful changes to the human body caused by a reduction in the influence of gravity. The Soviets reported similar disappointing results for a variety of exercise routines, even after turning for advice to the coaches of their Olympic athletes. It was obvious that there was more to those changes than a mere lack of activity. Exercise helps, but it is not the complete solution. Exercise needs gravity to be effective. Using legs to walk actively, working against the force of gravity. A breakthrough in medical care. Lying in bed, or just sitting around, also happen to be what a lot of us do. These are habits that can start as early as the college years. Therefore, anything that helped the astronauts would help anyone leading an increasingly sedentary lifestyle. The insights from observations in patients, confirmed through our research in healthy people, led to something of a breakthrough in medical and nursing care. Traditionally, patients in hospital were confined to bed for several days, even after mildest surgery, in the belief that rest would help recovery. After a hernia operation, childbirth, or routine appendectomy, patients would commonly spend 7 to 10 days in bed. Now, hernias are done as an outpatient procedure, and the others normally involve 1 or 2 days stays. Getting people up and about as soon as possible after surgery is now considered good practice. It has been adopted because it accelerates recovery and healing. This is one of the best examples of how not using gravity properly, lying in bed, can delay recovery. On the other hand, using it effectively, standing and walking, even with help, is beneficia. Health insurance companies were quick to endorse these findings. Staying young and healthy. If astronauts do not grow old faster in space, why do they return to Earth, showing so many of the symptoms we associate with aging? The similarities between the changes produced in astronauts in space and in men and women lying in bed right here on Earth led to many intriguing questions. Were our volunteers growing old simply by lying in bed? Clearly not. Both our volunteers and astronauts recovered fully after getting up and about on Earth's gravity. What was going on? The simplistic answers was that the symptoms may seem similar, but are in fact due to different mechanisms. After all, as the received wisdom goes, we all know that they are not reversible in the elderly, or we have been led to believe. What aging can mean and what it should mean. In the midst of one of my bed rest studies in California, I had an opportunity to observe some of the problems of aging firsthand. The mother of some good friends of mine fell and broke her hip. She was in her late 70s and needed full-time care, which could only be provided in a nursing home in nearby San Jose. For me, it was a whole new world. When I visited the home, I found that some of the residents lay in bed or sat in the lobby at what seemed like the same spot, day in, day out, staring blankly ahead. A few occasionally struggled down the hall with a walker. Most ate or drank very little, and even had trouble raising a fork to their mouths and chewing. Few were reading. All looked very frail and showed no interest in their surroundings. While talking to the staff, I was told some were rarely, if ever, visited. Their muscles got weaker. If they fell over, because their sense of balance was so poor, their broken bones did not seem to heal. In fact, most never recovered after a hip fracture. These changes were assumed to be the permanent and irreversible results of age. It was disheartening. A one-way street, despite all the valiant efforts of the staff. This, I thought, is what aging means for far too many people. The all-important question, can aging be reversed? I had done many bed rest studies before and was well aware of the change produced, but it was not until I visited the nursing home that it dawned on me that the question should perhaps be turned around. It was not, do astronauts and bed rest volunteers grow old under conditions of reduced gravity? What if the question I had to ask was, could the physical deterioration so obvious in the people in the nursing home be caused by some factor other than the unavoidable accumulation of years? Could it have something to do with gravity? The answer to this question raised a highly exciting prospect. Redefining the concept of aging. The more I looked into the matter, the more convinced I became that many of the symptoms of aging had little to do with which birthday you last celebrated. The theory I developed was that they are due to the gradual reduction, over many, many years, perhaps a lifetime, of the influence of gravity on the human body. But, you may say, gravity is all around us. We live in it our entire lives. How can it be good for some things and bad for others? If it is supposed to be a force for good, how can it make me stoop and look older? Clearly, the force of gravity does not change. It must, therefore, be something we do or stop doing that makes the difference to our bodies. And for most of us, the main lifestyle change as the years go by is that we start to take things easy. We are encouraged by friends, family, and others around us to rest or even retire. The result is that we make less and less use of gravity. Yes, gravity is always present, but if we do not use it, what good is it? People who adopt an easier lifestyle are, in effect, taking shelter from gravity. Like the astronauts and my volunteers, they develop the symptoms we have come to associate with old age, as the dictionary defines it. On Earth, we are constantly exposed to some gravity, however little we use it. So the changes take a lifetime to become evident or serious. People who avoid using gravity will age much faster than those who develop good gravity challenging habits early on and keep them up throughout the rest of their lives. Understanding gravity and developing good gravity challenging habits is the secret for aging well. Challenging gravity, understanding. A difficult concept. Gravity does not just make apples fall off trees, it keeps us firmly grounded and gives weight to our body mass. Body weight is a very important factor in our lives. It provides the load that stimulates structures that support us, such as bones and muscles. When you are standing up or sitting, your arms naturally hang down by your sides. That is because gravity is pulling them down. If you raise an arm in front of you, you must exert some effort to keep it there. You are challenging gravity. You will soon find that your arm feels heavy and tired. If for some reason your muscles have become weak, as happens after a bone fracture or illness, you may have trouble keeping your arm up for very long. If you're also holding some thing, such as a teacup or a jug of water, you may find it difficult to keep it steady. Exercises with handheld weights use gravity to strengthen muscles. Japanese astronaut Chiaki Mukai tells of her amazement after returning from her first mission, when she put a piece of paper on her outstretched hand. "It was so heavy," she says. In space with almost no gravity, the arms of astronauts do not hang by their sides, but seem to float in front of them. They do not stand on the floor because there is no up or down. Their feet are off the floor, legs slightly bent because they have no weight to carry. Their head leans forward because it does not need to be supported by the spine for balance. Astronauts do not need to put on their pants one leg at a time, but they soon learn it is faster to put both legs in at the same time. We challenge gravity all the time in little ways, combing our hair, pointing at something, chewing, getting in and out of a car, carrying bags of groceries, holding a baby. We challenge gravity in more rigorous ways when we get out of bed, climb a ladder, walk up a hill, go up or down stairs, or jump. Even standing challenges gravity because we are resisting its pull, moving in the opposite direction to its force. But, you may say, standing is not moving. If you think of moving as something beyond changing location, something that requires you to make an effort, to contract some muscle, then merely standing fits that bill. Think of it this way. If when you stood up you went absolutely limp and did not contract any muscles at all, you would crumble to the floor in a heap. Gravity would pull you there. Not only do you need to contract muscles to move your body up, but you continue to contract muscles to remain standing, even though most of us are not aware of the effort. Rudolf Nureyev and Mikhail Baryshnikov, the Russian ballet dancers, were spectacular when they jumped because they seemed stationary, suspended in midair. Michael Jordan often appeared to do the same thing. It was their energy and powerful muscles that kept them there longer than the average person, despite gravity pulling them down. In fact, they were defying gravity. High jumpers break records in much the same way. Ordinary jumping, or just standing, similarly, challenges gravity. Lifting a hand weight by curling your arm challenges gravity and tones up the muscle that does the curling the biceps. But think of the way down. Most people simply drop their arm, giving into gravity and receiving no benefit. However, if you make the same motion very slowly, resisting gravity, the benefits of this exercise are far greater, for you will be toning up your triceps as well. Becoming aware of how you use gravity in everything you do allows you to use it to your advantage. We are not all Nureyevs, nor do we need to be. Every little thing we do can either take advantage of gravity or be a waste of a good opportunity. Consider the benefits of sitting upright in a chair against slumping in a sofa, or of walking up and down the stairs instead of using the elevator. These examples demonstrate how in simple everyday activities we can either take advantage of gravity or be a gravity dodger. Start investing in yourself. You may say, I don't regard myself as old, I'm no couch potato, I exercise regularly, and I certainly don't spend too much time in bed, so why should I worry? This may well be so, but have you ever totted up exactly how much of the day you spend at an office desk or sitting in front of a computer, and how much of the evening you lounge in front of the TV screen? Or have you considered how much time you spend in your car instead of walking? Even if you go to the gym for an hour each day, it is not enough, unless you are consciously using gravity to stimulate every part of your body the rest of the time. All exercise, all movement, is good for the body. Deliberate movements that use gravity as a comprehensive stimulus bring the maximum benefits. And if you develop a set of habits in your life based on this approach, you are well on your way to building up a fund of health and vigor. In effect, you will be making a valuable long-term investment in yourself. Why is it important to invest in yourself? Think of it as building up a nest egg for the future, in exactly the same way that you set aside regular savings to draw on when you retire. When you are no longer generating the same income as when you were working, this nest egg will help you maintain your standard of living at the very period when you have more time to enjoy life. Even if you saved, the value of your savings will decline over time if you do not invest them. This is what happens to our vitality, call it youth, if you will, as well. How can you prevent this decline? By investing in yourself. This depends on embarking on a regular health savings and investment program by consciously developing habits that use gravity effectively. You can build up your reserves of health and vigor so that they will be there whenever you need them, for as long as you live. You can maintain your bone and muscle strength, good balance and coordination, youthful spring, enthusiasm, curiosity, and that twinkle in your eye that says you are always ready for new adventures. Will this approach extend your life? Perhaps. Will it prevent disease? Possibly. There is no evidence either way other than the evidence provided by your own eyes, but it stands to reason that if you keep yourself healthy with a diverse, gravity-harnessing portfolio, you will be less likely to suffer from a great number of diseases discussed in this book. Investing in yourself will certainly give you what you need to carry on doing the things you enjoy. Gravity is a total package. Harnessing the power of gravity is a way of life. Understanding how we use gravity to keep ourselves in tip-top shape, both physically and emotionally, is the first step. Keep using it, and your body will readjust to a new and higher level of function. Your sensors will regain their sharpness to respond. Your support structures will be strengthened by the load of the body's mass, the body's weight. Your hormone and immune systems will react positively to stress. You will sleep better. You will feel good and full of energy. You will enjoy what you eat, see, smell, and taste to a greater degree. Every system in the body and its ability to respond to external challenges depends on the way we use the gravity that surrounds us. Gravity is a total and comprehensive package. We do not have all the answers. I chose the systems in the chapters that follow as examples because we have direct and obvious evidence of how gravity affects them. But the body consists of many interdependent systems. Like a good orchestra, it makes beautiful music when its parts work in harmony. Professional musicians are naturally talented, but it is only through hard and constant practice that they achieve peak performance. However accomplished they may be individually, it takes rehearsal and the conductor to achieve a perfect symphony. So it is with our bodies. Gravity is the stimulus for each system and the catalyst for the whole. It is the key ingredient. What follows? The following chapters outline what we now know about the way the body works. They provide information to help you understand how we constantly use gravity as a stimulus. You will come to know what happens in space when gravity is minimized, and on Earth when we do not use it fully due to bad habits that we develop over the years. At the end of each chapter is a section covering the merits or drawbacks of remedies for the conditions that result from our misuse of gravity. This will provide the information you need to make smart choices. Most of these remedies are currently available. Others are still in the research stage. Breaking the myth. Every sense and every system in your body, every bone, muscle, tissue, fiber, and cell withers or thrives according to the way in which you use gravity. This book challenges the widely held belief that many of the changes associated with aging are unavoidable. We cannot stop the passing of years, but we can certainly halt and even reverse what comes with it. No one is beyond repair. Some people trying to lose weight put a picture of an obese person on the refrigerator door to discourage themselves from raiding its contents. However young and healthy you may now be, think ahead to how you might look and feel a few years or decades down the road if you neglect to make full use of gravity. Hermann Durnemann, Germany's oldest man, put it well when he said on his 110th birthday, "If I had known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself." The support structures, bones, muscles, joints, and skin encase the body, hold it together, support it, and enable us to move around. They are all collagen-based, a fibrous protein. Collagen is what gives elasticity and resilience to these tissues. Collagen fibers are flexible because they are joined together by small crosslinks that allow the fibers to slide up and down. If these crosslinks are damaged by injury or stiffened by inflammation, poor diet, or age, the flexibility of the collagen fibers will be limited, causing, among other things, feelings of stiffness in the joints and thinner, less elastic skin. Problems also arise when collagen is broken down by the enzyme collagenase and is not renewed. We do not know exactly how support structures sense gravity, but they do respond to loading. The load in this case is our body's weight. Bones in obese people are thicker and stronger. Without the loading provided by gravity, bones, muscles, and collagen will atrophy in organs that support the body's weight. In the near-zero gravity of space, the body has no weight, so bones, muscles, and joints do not have to carry a load. They are, therefore, deprived of the stimulus required to grow and thrive in order to hold up the body. As there is no signal, the body concludes that no response is needed. Something similar happens over a longer time to people down here on Earth, who use gravity less and less by leading inactive lives, or who cannot sense its force because of injury to the spine or brain. Although a great deal of research on how unloading in space affects muscles and bones has been carried out, no studies have been done on the skin and very few joints of astronauts,